Incredible performance of 10 months ago. And you know, he took a real beating at the hands of the champion.
The Mayweather-McGregor fight is coming up, so let's talk about boxing movies. Of all sports, boxing is the most cinematic. Besides the inherent drama of any sport event and the self-reflexive aspect of spectatorship offered in any sports movie, boxing is especially cinematic because the action is confined to the space of the ring and the contest of two opponents, and because it is especially brutal. Additionally, the history of boxing has lent plenty to movie narratives, including tales of mafia corruption, racial and gender issues, crises of masculinity and physicality, as well as the standard redemption, underdog, and rags to riches narratives. Boxing movies have a long history, dating back almost to the invention of film itself, and not long after boxing entered its modern era of the general use of gloves and Queensberry rules. For this ranking, however, only feature-length movies from the United States were considered. Although the boxing genre primarily originated in Hollywood, a few foreign boxing films would have otherwise been worth consideration. Documentaries were also excluded, as were movies about ex-boxers that don't feature extensive or any boxing scenes. For example, classics such as On the Waterfront and The Quiet Man are out. And movies that may feature a boxing scene or boxer, but aren't otherwise about boxing were also excluded, so no City Lights or Pulp Fiction. But unlike some rankings, this one will acknowledge that most boxing movies had been in black and white long before Raging Bull was ever made. Speaking of which, at number 10, Requiem for a Heavyweight. This theatrically released remake of a teleplay about life after boxing suffers somewhat from the limited scope inherited from originally being written for television. Good cinematography and acting, however, largely make up for this. The film's opening long take from the point of view of a boxer being punched by Muhammad Ali, or, as he was known then, Cassius Clay, is excellent in that it draws the spectator into the ring. Also, it's an economical way to avoid the difficulties of staging a realistic bout. As for the acting, Anthony Quinn is especially sympathetic as a washed-up boxer, and Jackie Gleason makes the most of some of the movie's best writing. Gleason received his only Oscar nomination the prior year for another sports movie, The Hustler. He probably should have received one for Requiem for a Heavyweight too. At number 9, Here Comes Mr. Jordan. This film stands out from the rest of this list. Some may not even consider it a boxing movie, per se. That the boxing part isn't integral to the story is highlighted by the fact that a decent remake of the film was made in 1978, Heaven Can Wait, which is about a football player instead of a boxer. And another remake in 2001, Down to Earth, isn't a sports movie at all. The boxing scenes in Here Comes Mr. Jordan are nothing special either. Nor, at first, does the silly story about fate and soul seem to recommend the film. In it, an angel prematurely takes the soul of a boxer, who, by the way, is also an aviator and a saxophone player. Because, why not? The angel's intention was to spare the man from the pain of his expected death. But it turns out it wasn't his time, and his corpse is cremated before the mistake can be rectified. So the angel and his boss, Mr. Jordan, go about trying to find the boxer a new body of a man who is really supposed to die soon. Oh, and there's also a Capra-esque subplot about the evils of unbridled capitalism, and that's linked to the film's romance. Silly, right? But it's just such a well-made comedy from classic Hollywood, earning the film 7 Oscar nominations, including 2 wins for its writing. Historically interesting, one of the film's writers had collaborated on actual Frank Capra films, and the other writer wrote the screenplay for the 1937 film Kid Galahad, a seminal gangster boxing picture and one of the contenders to barely miss out on this list. At number 8, Million Dollar Baby. Besides Rocky, Million Dollar Baby is one of 2 boxing movies to be awarded the Best Picture Oscar, 3 if you count On the Waterfront, which we aren't. Clint Eastwood also received an Oscar for direction and a nomination for his acting, and Hilary Swank and Morgan Freeman won Oscars for their performances. Impressively, Swank trained and bulked up for the role, and the boxing scenes in the movie benefit as a result. Meanwhile, Freeman once again provides narration and explanation.
Only ever met one man I wouldn't want to fight.
I can't stop it. Get out of here, you useless shit.
When I met him, he was already the best cut man in the business.
Can you stop?
A la The Shawshank Redemption.
Old life blown away in the blink of an eye. Nothing left but all the time in the world to think about it.
and a bazillion other movies. In this case, he's a half-blind kind of seer in the fashion of Homer, although Eastwood's character is the one with the interest in poetry and ancient language. Million Dollar Baby is a movie that should be seen before reading or watching reviews such as this one. Suffice it to say, it's a tragedy, and the movie works well on that level, reworking familiar narrative formulas and tropes, and underscored by the film's low-key lighting, even though the ending is contrived and largely counterfactual, which is part of the reason it faced some controversy and doesn't appear even higher on this ranking. At number 7, Body and Soul. The gangster and cost of fame story is too melodramatic. There's the old movie newspaper montage trope to show the progression of time, and the studio sets are a bit too obviously studio sets, albeit good-looking ones. Nonetheless, Body and Soul is a compelling film. The plot is structured largely as a dream/flashback. The film is part of a cycle of noir boxing movies, and it features positive portrayals of Jewish and African American boxers, something that deserves praise for a film from 1947. The best thing about it, however, is the outstanding cinematography, which with its Oscar-winning film editing creates what were the best boxing scenes ever filmed. The spotlighting as the boxer stands up for the beginning of rounds is an especially nice touch. At number 6, Champion. Next to Robert De Niro in Raging Bull, Kirk Douglas in Champion is the most menacing anti-hero in the history of boxing movies. Both Douglas and Arthur Kennedy, as his crippled brother, receive Oscar nominations for their portrayals. Paul Stewart, as the manager/trainer, is also a standout for his amazing look and voice. The film also received nominations for cinematography, musical score, and screenplay, and won an Oscar for film editing. Unfortunately, the boxing scenes are only so-so, even for 1949. Douglas displays no awareness to cover his face in any of the boxing scenes. On the other hand, that didn't prevent Sylvester Stallone from making some good fights. Speaking of the Rocky franchise, Champion might be one of the first films to feature a training montage. In this case, the montage is somewhat funny, perhaps intentionally and unintentionally, from the perspective of a post-Rocky spectator. At number 5, Somebody Up There Likes Me. Based on real-life world middleweight champion Rocky Graziano's autobiography, the film follows Paul Newman as Rocky throughout his rise from juvenile delinquent to world champion. The positive message of the film is better than most. In short, Rocky overcomes his sense of victimization. Deservedly, the film received an Oscar nomination for its black and white cinematography and won an Oscar for art direction. It also features great acting, led by Newman, and good and brutal boxing scenes. Stallone had to have been inspired in part by the film in the making of Rocky. Besides the name Rocky, some visual similarities and similarities in the speech mechanics of Stallone and Newman's respective Rockies, Rocky Graziano's real last name, Barbella, also sounds a bit like Balboa. At number 4, The Fighter. This is yet another redemption narrative based on a true story, a la Somebody Up There Likes Me, and numerous other boxing and non-boxing movies. The Fighter, nonetheless, is an engaging, entertaining, and well-made biopic. Christian Bale and Melissa Leo deliver Oscar-winning performances. Amy Adams was also nominated, and Mark Wahlberg, of all people, manages to ground the film with his more restrained portrayal. He evidently put in a lot of work to mirror the slugging style as well as the relatively introverted personality of the real-life Mickey Ward. The outstanding acting, amusing and dramatic family dynamics, and the realistic boxing scenes set this one apart from similar movies. At number 3, The Setup. This gritty noir features a plot that develops in real time, although not the first film to do this, the prior year's Rope, directed by Alfred Hitchcock for instance. The gimmick works well for this boxing picture. In particular, it allows the film to jump back and forth between moments involving minor characters and the central plot of a boxer who has been set up to take a dive in a fight, but he doesn't know it. There's an unusual amount of crowd shots during the action-packed boxing sequence too. Setup also features good performances from its leads, Robert Ryan and Audrey Totter, an impressive noir style, chiaroscuro lighting. At number 2, Rocky. For some movie viewers, the sports movie genre might as well have begun with Rocky. Although that's far from the truth, it did reinvigorate said genre. A sleeper, box office hit, and Best Picture Oscar winner that continues to spawn sequels, Rocky is the penultimate underdog narrative. Most of you are probably familiar with that narrative. Others may know about the influences of real-life boxers Chuck Wepner and Rocky Marciano on Balboa's propensity to profusely bleed and to adopt to a head-first, brawling style of boxing respectively. Also, like those real-life boxers, the Rocky franchise has featured an interesting history of seeming to, depending on how one interprets it, downplay, avoid, or overcome the racial issues inherent in the boxing. In the original Rocky, for instance, Apollo Creed is a sanitized, hyper-patriotic version of Muhammad Ali. Without any explicit sense of irony, the African-American Creed, in one scene, rides into the ring dressed as slave owner George Washington. Regardless, Rocky features an excellent climactic boxing scene. The boxing also benefits from being more realistic than in some of the sequels. And a great memorable score helps. Rocky was also one of the first films to employ a Steadicam, which allowed for the unprecedented realism of the boxing climax, as well as for the running scenes in the iconic training montage. And finally, at number 1, Raging Bull. One of the all-time great films in general, Raging Bull both pays homage to the history of boxing films, underscored by its black and white cinematography and its famous recitation of a scene from On the Waterfront, and is simultaneously innovative and vastly different from any other boxing movie ever made. Plenty of other boxing films have featured the rise and fall narrative, the aforementioned Body and Soul and Champion for instance. But unlike those pictures, Robert De Niro's Jake LaMotta is abusive to himself and others inside and outside of the ring from the start. There's little in the way of a sermon on the bad influence of the mafia and boxing, or a cautioning against wealth and fame either. Instead, Raging Bull is a psychological examination of a man whose career in boxing is an extension of his torment. Part of this is the unprecedented inside-the-ring close-ups during the violent boxing scenes. Also surprising is that this biopic appears to be relatively faithful to its unflattering portrait of its protagonist, being that it's based on LaMotta's autobiography, and LaMotta worked as a consultant on the set. To top it off, Raging Bull features great acting, especially by De Niro, who according to LaMotta, trained enough to be at a level of a professional boxer. Then, De Niro gained a bunch of weight to portray LaMotta's life after the ring. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe. We'd like to read your rankings and thoughts on boxing movies in the comments below. Also, if you like this video, be sure to check out our upcoming video of the 5 most overrated/disappointing boxing movies of all time.
Right turn, Clyde.
Onward.